Geoffrey Roberts, a historian and author of a great new book called Stalin's General. It's a book about Marshal Zhukov, who actually liberated the Soviet Union from Nazis and led the Soviet army to conquer Berlin in 1945. So we'll recommend. So in your book, you discuss Marshal Zhukov's life and his military genius. But do you agree that military genius taken alone isn't really enough to have a great victory or to win a great war? Because you also need self-sacrifice, you need enthusiasm. So if you look at the wars of today, let's say the war on terror, there doesn't seem to be much enthusiasm from people's side. Why is that? Is it because the cause isn't justified, or are people just tired of wars?
Yeah, the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, wasn't just won by Zhukov, of course. It was won by the whole Soviet people. The Soviet victory depending in the end on popular support for the war and the willingness to make huge sacrifices. Also, they depended on having a political and economic system that was able to survive the challenge of war and organise the war effort, and also impose quite a heavy discipline on the population in order to secure victory. Yeah, today the picture in relation to various wars is very different. In most cases, there's certainly not a great deal of popular enthusiasm about the wars. There's certainly divided political opinions, which makes it very difficult to prosecute and continue those wars, particularly prolonged conflicts such as the one we saw in Iraq and is still ongoing in Afghanistan.
But why? Obviously, no one likes a war, but it seems like in the old days, people were really driven to win. At this point, everyone's like fatigued with wars.
Well, it depends what the war's about, doesn't it? What's at stake? If you're talking about the Second World War, what Russians call the Great Patriotic War, what was at stake was the whole future of European civilization. Today's wars, obviously, the issues are quite important in some cases. But there are divided opinions about whether or not the war is worth the candle of what's at stake and so on. Yeah.
But are the issues maybe blurred? Because, for example, Zbigniew Brzezinski and other experts we spoke to, they're saying that war on terror is misleading because it doesn't really define the enemy. You don't really know what you're fighting for. Do you think that might be the problem?
Well, the war on terror is a vague concept. I think the problem's more that when the war on terror has taken the form of actual wars, such as the ones we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's been a confusions about what the objects of those wars were. Initially, the object is supposedly to security objects of various kinds, but then they get confused with various political and ideological projects, projects to transform these societies in the American or in the Western self-image. And of course, that makes the whole scenario very complicated.
But also, it seems like if you compare it, the wars that were fought in 20th century, let's say the Second World War, since we started off with that, it was also an involvement of ideological clashes like communism, liberalism, fascism. What's important today? Ideology or nationalism or patriotism? What would drive people today to actually, want to win a war?
Well, I think there are ideological issues at stake in these various contemporary conflicts. What various Western governments and indeed Western public opinion has been at stake is, Western liberal democracy and the values that represents, and various terrorists and fundamentalists of various kinds are seen as being a threat to those values and a threat to those systems. So there are big issues at stake here. Now, whether or not the threat is as great as it's made out, that's another question, and how you combat that threat, that's another. But I think there are significant ideological issues at stake in today's conflicts. Maybe not quite as fundamental and on such a grand scale as the ones you mentioned in relation to the Second World War. But no, I think that ideas and values are very central to these ongoing conflicts. Of course, that's not the only thing at stake. There's also various state interests and various narrow political interests at work here, which, again, complicates the whole situation.
Well, we're talking about ideologies, and at the end of the day, if you look at why America wages all these wars, or at least the official version, is that they believe that people in other countries that are ruled by dictators deserve a better ideology, which is democracy. Yeah. So they try to export that democracy to those countries, save Libyan people in Benghazi from being slaughtered by Gaddafi, or save people in Iraq from being slaughtered by Hussein. But then the ways and the means they do that, doesn't that really undermine the very core of the principles they're really trying to export and insist?
Yeah, I mean, democracy promotion has been, at the heart of American foreign policy, for a long time, going back at least to, I'd say, the time of the First World War. So that's not a new theme. The problem is, what's the best way to, promote democracy? Is it by foreign military intervention? Is it by trying to impose your own system on other people?
Is there even a way to impose a democracy?
Well, recent experience would suggest that it's very problematic trying to export your system to another country. I think we can see that clearly in the case of Afghanistan and also in the case of Iraq. But there is this kind of American ideology of democracy promotion, that that democracy is not just good for America, it's good for the rest of the world, and it's not just good from a political point of view, it's also good from the point of view of peace. So there's some quite good motives, I think, underlying United States democracy promotion. But as you say, the way they go about it does have a tendency to undermine its own goals.
Iraq is not a very stable country at this point. Stable is a word that doesn't apply to Afghanistan at all. And then, we hear a lot of talk about new possibilities of going into Syria or, hitting Iran. Do you really feel like Western states feel an imminent threat from those two countries? Do we really need to go in those countries and invade them too?
No, I don't think Western governments feel a threat from Syria. Not a dire threat. I think Iran is a different case. I think there is a perception of an Iranian threat in various forms. Of course, particularly in the case of the Iranian acquisition of nuclear weapons. But that's not just a threat seen by the West. I mean, the Russian government also views Iran acquiring nuclear weapons as being problematic, and is part of a diplomatic and political effort to stop that. So
invading Iran would solve the problem?
No. I'm just saying that Russia doesn't want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons.
No one wants Iran
to
have nuclear weapons.
So Russia is part of a political and diplomatic effort to try and avert that eventuality, and of course that's the right way to go. And I do.
But we're talking about the military actions that are taking place.
I do think that the experience of military action in relation to Iraq and Afghanistan, how problematic it's turned out, is acting as a constraint on the American or Western predisposition to military action in relation to Iran. I'm not so sure about the Israelis, of course. I mean, they're going to make their own decisions and pursue their own course.
But they can't really act alone without American accord, so
I wouldn't necessarily say that. Depends how dire the Israelis view the Iranian threat or the threat of an Iranian bomb, and what risk they'd be prepared to take. I personally wouldn't rule out unilateral Israeli action in relation to Iran, which of course would be a very frightening scenario should that actually develop.
Jeffrey Roberts, historian, author of the new book Stalin's General. It's about Marshal Zhukov. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.